Not to mention if the worm, like say you're sitting directly on the worm's head, it's like, all right, I dashed 60 feet through solid rock. Like you were just in the equivalent of a massive industrial accident. You are cased. You're done. It's over. You take 1 million damage. Not even Wish can put you back together.
May the gods have mercy on your soul.
Welcome to Monsters and Multiclass, your Dungeons & Dragons fix. I'm Ellie.
I'm Jared Bornigal.
And I'm Will Melton.
And on this episode, we are taking a look at purple worms. Finally, we somehow have never done this. It's a big classic monster. And we're doing this from the perspective of covering the difficulties of fighting like a gargantuan monster. There's a lot of complications to that, a lot of weirdness that 5e doesn't account for. And then especially if it's so big where it feels like it's the whole damn battlefield, which purple worm can. So let's dive into it.
The big thing for these behemoths is that they're big, as Ellie was mentioning. They're basically a play on the sandworms from Dune, but funny enough, they're actually smaller by a factor of like 5. There is a mention of their actual size in 3.5. 5th edition doesn't specifically mention a length or anything, but there's no reason to assume it would change greatly. They are listed as about 80 feet long, which is pretty darn big, and I think it's like 5 feet in diameter, something wild like that. But
yeah, I think maybe a bit more. It says they have enough diameter to swallow a horse whole. That was kind of the one little size.
Maybe it's a 5 foot radius. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Well, 5 foot
Tidbit
diameter
you got.
still.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. It's big. So taking a look just to start at the stat block here, it's nothing particularly wild. We've seen creatures like this before. It's gargantuan, as mentioned, armor class of 18, HP of 247, speed of 50, burrow of 30 feet. Then stat-wise, we're looking at 28 strength, 7 dex, 22 constitution, 1 intelligence, 8 wisdom, and 4 charisma. Big brains over here.
Yeah.
For saving throws,
Masterminds.
For saving throws, it has Constitution plus 11 and Wisdom plus 4. I'm not entirely sure why it has saving throws in Wisdom beyond maybe it's just like you can't get into this thing's mind. Like it's like there's so little going on that you just can't penetrate.
Maybe
I got
it's
nothing.
usually more for charisma.
For a
Saving
mindless
throws.
creature?
For getting into like the saving throws that deal with like impacting someone's mind and infiltrating them. Isn't that usually charisma saving throws?
Yeah, it could be intelligence too, like feeble mind and such. Not that feeble mind would really affect this creature.
I said they already have 1 intelligence. That's the default.
For senses, we've got 30 feet of blind sight and tremor sense out to 60 feet and a passive perception of big old 9. It does come out as a challenge rating 15 with a proficiency bonus plus 5. That's really whatever. And for special innate abilities, it has the Tunneler ability. The worm can burrow through solid rock at half its burrow speed and leaves a 10-foot diameter tunnel in its wake. That's probably about how wide it is. It's probably about 10 feet diameter.
Right.
Yeah, that can be assumed.
I guess, yeah.
For actions, we have a multi-attack. The worm makes 2 attacks, 1 with its bite and 1 with its stinger. The bite is a classic big damage plus a save or you are swallowed. So it's plus 14 to hit, reach of 10 feet, does 3d8 plus 9 piercing damage. And if the target is large or smaller, it must succeed on a DC 19 dex saving throw or be swallowed. A swallowed creature is blinded, restrained, and has total cover against attacks and other effects outside of the worm, and it takes 66 acid damage at the start of each of the worm's turns. If the worm takes 30 damage or more on a single turn from a creature inside it, the worm must succeed on a DC 21 con saving throw at the end of that turn or regurgitate all swallowed creatures which fall prone in a space within 10 feet of the worm. If the worm dies, then you are no longer restrained and you can slide out, exiting prone. The DC 21 con saving throw with a plus 11 to constitution saving throws basically means that even if you can do 30 damage to this creature, it's still a 50-50 shot whether or not it's going to puke you up.
Yeah, this is a really, really nasty swallow. There's a lot of these gargantuan creatures that have this. And a lot of them are probably based off of the purple worm stat block because this is in the basic rules. This is out from the beginning of 5th edition, and as we mentioned in previous editions, they're kind of like a classic staple in D&D. But yeah, in terms as far as the deadliness of swallows go, there's always most of them feel like it's gonna be hard for someone to get out of that. Very much so with the purple worm. DC 19 dex save to not be swallowed, and if you are, 66 automatic damage on a turn. And then like doing 30 damage on a turn is very hard for a lot of classes.
Yeah,
Especially when you can't see.
Right. So you're going to have disadvantage on all the attacks. The AC is still 18. So yeah, getting up to that damage threshold is pretty rough. And just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, when it says on a single turn, that basically means that like you have to do it on your turn. Even if 2 people are swallowed, if they collectively do 30 damage, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, on separate turns. I guess you could
Hold.
You would need to coordinate where one player holds readies their action when the other one, because then it's on the same turn. But from a realism role playing type perspective, like how would they? I guess they could talk. Okay, they could shout at each other probably, and 3, 2, 1, and then go ham on it.
Sure. Yeah, it's still going to be a
I
little
would
bit
definitely
difficult.
allow that as a TM.
Probably. It does say though, or more on a single turn from a creature inside it. So I'm wondering if that's like rules as intended, if it's supposed to be just know it has to be one creature, or if that's just kind of fuzzy writing there.
Yeah, I guess a creature means raw, a single creature, but that would be a weird thing for them to specify.
Yeah. Well, I'll say that one's kind of up to DM discretion and what your players can put out. If they have literally no way of getting 30 damage in a single turn, and they're all going to die because they're inside the worm, then yeah, maybe reward the coordination.
Yeah, definitely. It's the type of thing I would definitely want to reward, the creative thinking and the coordination, especially if this is like round 2, which I mean, this worm could just open up with a bite attack and then swallow someone immediately. And then if they have no chance of getting out by doing 30 damage, the rest of the party has a very limited amount of time to deal 247 damage to this worm to kill it.
Yeah, that's a could be a lot. I don't want to say that's a lot, but I keep seeing you all put out like 150 damage in one round, and I'm like, is it a lot? No, it's probably going to be difficult. This one, at least, this creature by default doesn't have any resistances, so that is nice. You can basically just bring out whatever big guns you got, and you're going to do some damage to it. But regardless of the bite and swallow, we do also have the tail stinger, which honestly might be scarier than being swallowed by this, because at least when you are swallowed by the worm, you're not getting hurt anymore, and it's just 21 damage on average per round, and you're safe as long as you can tank that for a little while. Maybe you've got resistance to acid damage, something like that. You're nice and cozy inside the worm. But the tail stinger does it's plus 14 to hit, reach of 10 feet, does 3d6 plus 9 piercing damage, and the target must succeed on a DC 19 Constitution saving throw, or take 12d6 poison damage on a failed save, half as much on a successful one. So on a failed save, you're looking at an average of 61 damage. That's enough to drop like a level 6, 7 creature on average. Will, do you remember how much health your barbarian has right now at level 7?
80s. I think he would be the only one that would survive one hit from this.
That sounds about right. Especially if it was being real mean, there's no reason it couldn't tail stinger and then bite somebody. So it definitely has pretty heavy damage output.
I was thinking actually the inverse when you mentioned that. It's like, oh, you're nice and warm and cozy and safe in the acid stomach. Just like the imagery of the worm sick of you trying to eat your way out. So it's like eats its own tail to sting you in its stomach.
The Ouroboros purple worm.
What's it doing? You should hear like a faint, oh no.
Stabbing into its own mouth. Ugh. It better not miss though, because it doesn't actually have any resistance to its own poison. So that could get dangerous. The best way to have the purple worm kill itself is just have everybody hide in its mouth.
One intelligence.
Which does bring me to the idea of this thing is probably not going to be attacking efficiently. So as much as a tail stinger and a bite is probably like a really killer combo and a good way to take out just about anybody in one hit if they are failing all of their saves, which there's a good chance they will. It may not be that intelligent to just do such an efficient attack and deadly attack.
And it also, that leads right into one of the big things I want to talk about in terms of the difficulties of running a fight against such a large creature.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, like, if we're going by 3rd edition, they're 80 feet long, and their 2 attacks are on opposite sides of that 80 feet.
Right.
And as written, it's just supposed to be, it doesn't matter. But if it's like extended out 80 feet, how is it, and the party's attacking its head and it's biting at him, how's that tail stinger getting in there? It feels very strange. And then especially so if they're fighting underground, which is most likely we're going to counter them. You guys have actually fought a purple worm and Out of the Abyss, and you were in the Underdark in purple worm tunnels. And I just kind of theater minded and hand waved it away, and it just worked. But like, if you think about it, this worm is stretched out in this tunnel it's creating, and you're standing at the front of it. How is it getting a tail stinger in?
Nope, I got nothing. At least not from that perspective of being in tunnels. In tunnels, that makes it really, really complicated.
Because, I mean, that's what they do. They're tunnelers. We didn't really talk about lore or anything. There's not much to one intelligence.
Sure.
They're more natural disasters than anything else. Yeah, I mean, the ravenous hunters, loud noises attract them. Like, very much kind of Dune sandworm type feeling to them, but they don't have any, like, holy,
it's obviously
kind of, like, symbolism around them.
which inspired the Dune books, from what I recall.
Really?
Oh.
Yeah. Isn't Tremors like an 80s movie? Was it 90s. Based on anything? Was it night? Okay. It doesn't matter. Either way.
Some drunk guy wrote it in an afternoon.
After reading Dune, probably. No, he actually probably watched the 80s Dune and then was like, all right, what if we made that a horror movie? Doesn't matter. Very, very little connection between those beyond worms.
Right. But yeah, so their main thing is tunneling, and they eat anything in their way, rocks and all that, and apparently they'll create like precious metals and gems through their digestion of these rocks. And so some people hunt them down to try and gather that, which sounds really, really dangerous and foolhardy. And if you're at the point where you could comfortably take on a purple worm to harvest like the gems inside of it, I would think you have better ways to just make some money.
I mean, maybe. I guess depends on what your way of hunting them is, because you could very much just be hunting its excrement, which would be more
just following them. Okay.
Yeah, following the tunnels and getting what comes out of it. Finding ones that just naturally die. It's not like it really goes into that in this lore by any means, but could very much be a hook for some reason. I'm just imagining like working within the underground, the Underdark, whatever you want to call it in your world, and there's just constant earthquakes and people are kind of used to it, and it's like, oh yeah, that's just the local purple worm, but then one day everyone notices, hey, the earthquakes just stopped for the last 3 months. That's a bit weird, and people know it died. Hunters come in trying to find its body, and now it's a race to find the purple worm's body.
Sure. Okay. And I'm sure we covered the scavengers and various creatures, and so then those are fights you have to deal with. And...
Right. Whole lot you could do with that.
Yeah, definitely.
And then on the other side, I mean, it could just be like a really big group of mercenaries, and it's a fantasy world. Some people do the high risk, high reward. Maybe they really are worth that much that it is there's a reason to join up with that. And if you want your party to be a part of that on the team that joins up, I mean, you don't want to give them 20,000 gold. they're part of a group, so they're going to split it with whoever lives. Maybe your party is absolutely evil and they kill everyone at the end and take all the money. That's their choice, I guess.
Respectable. It's valid. We're not
Right.
here to judge.
You play your game how you want, but these are things to keep in mind. You
This
know,
happened
you
in
can at least
KOTOR, the Crate Dragon. It's like, oh, help me bomb this Crate Dragon.
Knights of the Old Republic.
Yeah, and there's, of course, the BioWare. Yeah, it's like, you owe me half the money. It's like, I owe you none of the money, and I'm going to kill you with a lightsaber.
I miss when games had choice. Did I ever do the evil stuff? No, but just knowing it's there, it
Knowing that you didn't pick it makes you feel so much better about yourself.
100%. That's
I read a paper
probably
that nobody did the full evil stuff, and I was like, oh shit. I thought it was going to be like a 50-50 split of the just like psychotic murder this entire village of people for $7 things. But no, it's like 3% of people. I was like, that's concerning.
I can't do it. I don't know why. Like,
Same,
it's a
but
default,
for the good
always
stuff.
A good playthrough.
I can't let them.
You're
Yeah,
like, I have to be good in real life. The guardrails are down.
Right. Even like and then replaying the games, like, all right, I'm going to do the evil playthrough. I constantly find myself feeling too bad about the evil things on the pixels on the screen. I don't want to hurt their feelings, the scripts and everything, and I can't do it. I don't know why.
It very much depends on the game, how it's written and everything. I think Mass Effect is a great example where nobody did the Renegade. And I recently did a Renegade playthrough and I'm like, I get why no one did this. It's the exact same game, but every once in a while, Shepard goes, hey, fuck you. And that's it. That's like the only difference. So it really wasn't worth it.
Right.
Oversimplifying that, Mass Effect fans, please don't get mad at me. It's a great game. Just, I don't really like it. The Renegade side of it. Anyways,
super off topic.
Super. I'm sure that could honestly be a whole conversation in itself and making meaningful choices for your players by giving them the option to do evil things. But that's not what this is about.
Hey, this is about monsters that are too big for the map.
Right. More like topics that are too big for one episode.
Boo.
So, we've got the lore here, and the lore itself, as you said, is pretty straightforward. The one thing that I would change or allow to change up pretty easily here is the underground aspect. Because these are so heavily based on the dune sandworms, I like them in deserts. I mean, that just also makes sense. It's cool, and you can steal from Dune, which you should do at just about every opportunity you can.
Yeah. I mean, in the book's defense, in the environment area, like that little guide, it says desert and Underdark.
Good.
So, no reason. These can't just be in sand.
Perfect. So then getting into that concept, though, that you brought up earlier, Ellie, and obviously is the theme of this, is how to run these fights where the creature is the entire battlefield. Because if you do just treat this like a monster where you plop down your 20 by 20 mini, because that's what Gargantuan is listed as, it just says 20 by 20 or bigger, and then just kind of shrugs in the book. You can do that, and I think you'll have an all right fight. It'll be difficult because the damage outputs are high. It'll be memorable because the swallow abilities aren't something you see all the time. The poison damage is just really deadly, so people will remember that. But I really feel like you're missing out on a lot if you just go that standard way. And I think even, Ellie, when we played it, I think that was something you expressed where you were like, I don't love how this just felt like a boom worm.
It felt like a turn-based video game RPG, like Final Fantasy, or anything like that, where you were like, there's the giant purple worm in front of you, just kind of like hovering in space, and you were lined up in front of it, and you just traded blows.
Yeah,
like movement wasn't part of it. It was like, it's 80 feet long. Anywhere you go, you're gonna hit it, and it's just gonna be able to strike you anywhere.
So I have thought of kind of 3 different ways to run monsters that range on Gargantuan. And those can be summarized as the monster is everything, the monster is everywhere, and the monster is all at one spot. And to go over this like monster, yeah, you see what I did there. It wasn't that clever. So the concept being like with the monster is everything. This is one that I know we've talked about in the past with my prime example being a kraken, where the monster has maybe multiple points that be considered dangerous or weak points, and it allows you to kind of spread the monster out over the entire battlefield and give certain points of interest. When we had a kraken fight many moons ago, we had like the kraken's head, and then its 10 tentacles were kind of placed throughout the map and could be targeted and were hazards on the battlefield that the party could either choose to attack and give themselves some breathing room, or they could attack the kraken directly, which might do more damage, might be more effective at just wearing it down quicker, but also maybe harder as it ducks underwater, obscures itself in ink, or is just overall terrifying because getting close to it means that its mouth can bite you. What I really like about that method when we've run it is it gives the players a sense of progression as they fight the creature, compared to just like hacking at a massive sack of hit points. It really feels like they have to make kind of tactical choices throughout it.
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed that with the Kraken fight. I remember that one. Tentacles popping up. Yeah.
With a purple worm, that might be a little bit hard to run.
Mm-hmm.
There's not really many reasons for it to have offshoots of itself. It is a singular creature, so I don't know of a way that I would run that fight this way.
No, I think this is actually the worst example for what you just said, which I think is the best way to do it, because the purple worm is a 80-foot meat tube. There's nothing to it. It has no brain. Like in the picture, you're like, how does this have one intelligence? It has no head. It has a hole in the front. It is a very dull thing except for the bite and tail. So it doesn't make sense to run it like that. I liked the Kraken fight, and it presents a lot of interesting ways to go about it. I think the problem, though, is you have to figure out how to translate damage from like tentacles to the primary. So
yes,
unfortunately, in D&D, the only way they give you is resistance vulnerability, which I think is, I don't know, it's a really blunt instrument for dealing with this, because how do you deal with like
fair? So
you have 10 tentacles and somebody fireballs the tentacles. How does that translate? I think it kind of should actually hit the Kraken harder than it normally would have. And I think that's an interesting way. Like you got a party member who has cool AoE abilities, fighting one thing. That's a fireball on one thing is like the least fun thing to do in D&D. It just sucks. It's true.
Yeah, when I ran that, I did give the tentacles individual HP, so that if you attacked them, it would do damage to the tentacles, and then I believe half the damage went to the actual Kraken itself. So if you had an AoE that hit 15 tentacles, which didn't even have that many, then it would basically translate all of that damage to the Kraken. Just 50% would be to the Kraken, and the rest would be to the tentacles. I think that turned out a little bit messy, and what I also have as a potential way to do it isn't less messy, but might feel a little bit better, which is giving the tentacles individual health still, but then not taking away that health or any health from the Kraken or whatever the core creature is until those are fully removed. So the tentacles have 50 HP, and once the tentacle is actually killed, you then in one fell swoop take 25 HP away from the Kraken. So that way you're not managing both the entire time. It just kind of gives like a, hey, once this one thing is taken care of, it's like you like hit the weak spot in a video game, right? And it goes, and you can tell that you heard it. You did something successful. So it rewards those AoE attacks. It rewards attacking the weak spot in the first place. It's not even a weak spot in this case. It's honestly a strong spot. But, again, still gives that sense of progression, but a little less number management throughout the actual fight.
I definitely like that, and I think that could work really well. But again, it goes back to all that's really unique to the Kraken.
Not just the Kraken, but I don't think it's definitely not helpful for the purple worm.
No, I'm just trying to think. There's also other, like there's the Elder Elementals. Long time ago, years ago, we did like a series on them, and a couple of those were, there was a couple that were just like big gargantuan monsters, and then others where they were the map. You were fighting a storm, and that's another one that would be tricky. But I to build off of what you were saying, you could actually still kind of do the same thing, because it's hard to say like it's all around you, just swing, because that doesn't feel good. You're just like hacking at the air. It's like, oh yeah, it hurts. Whatever. There's concentrated nodes around, like magical like nodes of energy around in that area, which kind of are like the tentacles and a core in the center. If you're closer to the core, it's more dangerous. You can attack nodes, and then you can kind of play it the same what you did with like the tentacles for the Kraken.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that would work on the elder elementals for sure. Or really, again, just any gargantuan creature, because what are tentacles but just limbs? And most gargantuan creatures, they're going to have arms and legs. And if you want to give them separate initiatives or separate things you can attack, usually 5e does not handle that very well. But if you're calling them just different creatures, more or less, it does actually work out all right. If you want to give them separate initiatives, you can, but you definitely can't have them move by themselves if their arms and legs too far. That's weird.
Right.
Where one leg goes forward 10 feet, another one goes back, and soon the monster's just doing the splits. And yeah, I'm not messing with that.
Right.
But that does bring me to my next thing, or next option of the monster being everywhere. And that one does kind of come up when the creature is large and has the ability to attack from absolutely anywhere. The concept of it being in or out of reach starts to lose meaning, as the monster can kind of be in front of you, it's kind of behind you. Like you mentioned, Ellie, it's like fighting a storm. It definitely does feel a little bit awkward, and I think actually your mention of like putting nodes in there to attack might probably feel like work out better. It still does feel a little bit odd when it's like so big that it's like, well, why couldn't I just swing right where I am and do some damage? So maybe there's a combination of these to everything. But I think that works like really well. This at least concept works really well when you are fighting kind of less corporeal creatures. I think the elder elementals were really the only ones I could come up with, because they had like a water one, the phoenix, and then the
Earth turtle.
Something. Yeah, Zaratan, I remember. Earth turtle, that's kind of more of a structure, so you could probably do more like giving it weak points. But again, probably not the best for a purple worm.
No. I say still no good solution for that.
I would say that the best is just a kind of binary where you have a head and a tail, and you just make sure it never gets 80 feet out of whack.
Yeah. And so that's my third one here of the monsters all at one spot. The worm kind of ends up being two, but the idea being that, you know, when multiple segments don't make sense, the creature might be huge, but this is saying that there's only one section of it that matters. So the purple worm is a good example of this, because it's so big, but you can just say that its body it can't be attacked. You know, like it's very strong. It can't actually have any damage go through it. It's not a weak point in any capacity. So it's got an AC of 35 or whatever. You just can't break through it. So it doesn't matter. But its head, its tail, these are points of weakness. And that's how you kind of treat that, as these are the points of interest. And honestly, from there, you just connect a string to them. Not actually. I guess you could glue a string to the base if you want. Maybe put some sticky tack on there. And then, you know, as Will was saying, you kind of just move them and make sure that they never get 80 feet apart from each other.
So they kind of independent movement, act on the same initiative, though.
Yeah, the movement part definitely does get weird, because officially,
right?
Yeah, like they shouldn't move separately. I think that's kind of up to you. I'm feeling like it would be at least interesting to let them move separately, as long as they're not getting 80 feet apart. That seems like an all right limiter to me. And having them be on two different initiatives would feel interesting, at least.
Yeah, that would make it a more interesting fight. Separate initiatives. Attack range gets really weird, though, because like the bite and the tail stinger are 10-foot reach. Yeah, that's like another thing where it gets kind of weird, like, because let's say it's the worm is stretched out at 80 feet and somebody's standing in the middle of the body at 40 feet, 15 feet away from it. Like, can it not? I guess as written, it can't really like contort to get it in a certain way.
Well,
like,
in this case, if you're going with the string idea here, then it could. it would be able to at least, move within 30 feet forward, and then it's within the 10 feet of range, whatever. The idea just being more that making sure it never gets more than 80 feet away from its tail. And even if the head moves, the tail has to follow. So that does become a little bit weird. Maybe a separate initiative for movement. No, that's a bad idea. No. Don't do that.
Hey, that was actually a uniquely bad idea. It kind of like came out of nowhere and hit me in the head. Like, what?
At least I recognized it after I said it, like immediately. All right.
Yeah. Actually, yeah. You do have to just kind of like loosey goosey it during the fight. It's not going to be doing the worm train thing. The worm train thing is it's fine. The tail moves with the head. But in the fight, you can you take your 50 foot of movement and you move the head and the tail where they need to be, essentially. Just kind of like picture how a worm would act in real life, just kind of like wriggling in different directions.
Yeah. And so,
it does have the ability to support itself based on at least the art. It's like that classic, like lift it out of the ground, like curled in on itself, which could be a way to fight it, where it's just like that and it's like striking at you, and maybe the tail's coming from underneath the ground.
See, that's when I would start.
But I think that's selling it short, because I think there's cool stuff that could be done with the movement and the burrow speed than just like the static thing. But in terms of not weird movement, because I'm picturing if you have like two minis, head and tail connected by string, and you're like trying to move it around the grid system, it's gonna feel like Snake, like the game Snake, where it just like has that perfect 90-degree movement, and it's gonna feel a little weird.
Well, why would you think it has to be that when really it could just be wherever the string lies? I mean, if you are 80 feet apart, it's going to be, you don't have to keep it taut. I mean, if it's 70 apart, then it's going to curve a little bit. And that's, I think, more.
No, what I'm saying. So in that situation where like something's in the middle of its body and it's just like hacking at it there, and the tail and the head are 40 feet technically out of reach, is like the head or the tail going to like curl in on itself and like perfectly move up the 40 feet. That's where you kind of just talk about like it can move through vertical space, not flying. It just kind of like lifts itself up and comes over you and strikes.
Yeah,
I guess that's more like a snake than a worm at that point. But
it's
it fits. Yeah,
I don't know.
It's fine.
I really don't like the reach just in general on this. The fact that it is limited to 10 feet just seems really incorrect for a gargantuan monster. I get what it's going for, because the way that the game is written here, it's talking about a static creature that takes up 20 feet, and anything within 10 feet, any direction, it can attack, which basically gives it, from it, like it controls 30 feet out, basically. Right. So I don't think it works if you try and split up its head and tail. And I think that's the long and short of it. Yeah. And honestly, I don't care. I'm throwing out the reach. Its reach is pretty darn big. How about that? Like, unless you are literally running away from it to be up on a mountain and taking shots, it can probably move to you with a 50-foot move speed, and it can probably get to where it needs to be to attack who it needs to attack. So honestly, I hate to just say like, oh, throw caution to the wind, but this is a time where if you're really trying to map out if, oh, is it 10 feet away, or, oh, somebody's in between, it can move and attack them. That's the long and short of it. It can probably reach you.
Right. So another way to handle this is kind of like purple worms specific, and there's other monsters like it, but I think it could be extrapolated into other things. Scrap the minis. I know we're huge on the minis and the battle map, and we love that tactical thing. And based on unofficial surveys I've seen, it seems like a lot of tables play with that as well.
Yeah, but I've already stopped listening to you. No, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, this would be put in time to theater mind it and play it very cinematically, and stop worrying about the movement specifics of the worm and play it more like this environmental hazard, where on its initiative it's kind of is where it needs to be, and you're fully utilizing its burrow speed. And I think you can make this really cool, intense fight where it bursts out of the ground and into the air and curls down and comes down on someone, and that's a bite and a swallow attack. And from the party's perspective, that person is just gone, because the worm just keeps going on the ground and burrowing. And as its way down, its tail's whipping around and strikes out at someone and disappears under the ground in the burrow. And then it's like, oh, fuck. And then things are still like, there's you could do things like hints of where it's going to come up, or if you're like in the Underdark in a cave system where it's coming out of a wall or whatever. And so people are trying to gather around it and ready actions to attack and do whatever it is they need to do. And I just keep having to do things like that. Pop out of areas. I think it could be really cool if you're in this like elaborate cave system and there's this purple worm around. It could almost feel like, even though this is like this huge dumb thing, like this kind of horror monster that's hunting you, like you're trying to like work your way through this labyrinth of tunnels in the Underdark and the pitch black, and this massive 10-foot diameter purple worm mouse just juts through the wall trying to bite you and swallow you, and you get away, and then the tail breaks through the ceiling trying to stab someone through the chest.
Absolutely.
And you're like
terrifying.
trying to fight it as you go.
Yeah, and that can actually lead to cool environmental stuff too, in addition of the tunnel collapsing. I mean, if it really keeps popping in and out, then you're going to very quickly ruin the structural integrity of whatever cavern or tunnel system you're in at the moment. So, maybe on round 3, the ceiling collapses, and now you've got deck saves trying to avoid that. Otherwise, you're crushed, knocked prone, take a whole bunch of bludgeoning damage. Things like that could be really interesting. Or maybe you intentionally try to cause the ceiling to collapse. And this is a time where, hey, lean into that cinematic aspect. Somebody goes, hey, if I cast Shatter or Earthquake right now, as the DM, you're kind of like leading up to it, like, oh, the rocks kind of fall and little areas are becoming weaker, and there's like a small pillar that's holding things up. And somebody's like, what if I destroy that over the worm? Boom, great idea. Let's see how that plays out. Lots of options for some creative stuff there. And yeah, I really like that idea though, just popping in and out. You do have to be somewhat careful with that, as we've definitely dealt with in our past times, of a monster that literally dives down and hides and doesn't come back out until its turn is kind of annoying to fight from a player perspective. But you could always have it where, hey, it dives in, but the tail is still showing or something like that.
Right, because it's most likely going to be the only monster. So it's basically the monster goes and the party goes. And so I would flavor it like you get your turn and you're attacking it and do whatever you need to do to it as it is diving down.
Right. Yeah, I think that works really well.
I would never, ever, ever, ever do that with a purple worm, because it sucks. I hate it. You're a terrible person for doing that with any monster. But the purple worm,
I really felt like this one was more thematic than anything, but all right, it's part of the
purple
course
worm. Why would the purple worm give a shit? It's the purple worm. This thing's probably lived 100 years, never once thinking, wow, this thing's a threat to me. It just an eating machine. It would never think, I'm going to play this one safe. Even after, I'd say, 250 damage, it's not going to get it through its head that it's at any risk at all.
It says 247 health, but...
Yeah. So, yeah, I think it's more about just how it would hunt a creature, of almost like going into an instinctual mode of how it would hunt a creature that is very large and maybe needs to be not so much tactical. It's more of just how it's positioning itself within a tunnel structure to make use of its head and tail. And what Ellie's suggesting, it sounds like to me, is more just the thematic aspect of it, less so of the, hey, hide in between, because the purple worm knows that I'm going to hide in the back and only pop out on my turn. Like, that's, I don't think it's what you were suggesting. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, I'm not. This was not targeted at you even slightly. I think that you're completely right. In the tunnel situation, it's not going to be like retreating. It's going to be just blasting through, because that's the way it lives its life.
Right. Yeah, that's what I meant. Like, it's everything about this to me sounds like it never stops moving, because it's also how it eats. And I imagine that's just how it hunts. And so there's like 5 creatures here for it to eat. And so that's how it's trying to eat it. And it knows if it gets one of a tail stinger and poisons it, it's easier to, so it's just kind of like doing hit and runs, just blasting through everything.
That's that promotes the idea that your party might want to bait it somewhere. It's like, hey, get into this big cavern. You don't want to really fight it on its home turf.
That's true.
Yeah,
Fighting it in a tunnel is the worst spot. So it very much could be a try and survive until you can get to a more advantageous position. bringing in things like survival checks mid-fight, but I will say these are things that I find difficult for players to suggest in the middle of a fight. Usually they're thinking of what can I do with the things that kill monsters, because that's what 5e trains you to do. So that is by no means a hit at players. Don't be afraid as a DM to just prompt them for those roles. No action, no bonus action needed. Just saying like, hey, do a survival check for me. You're aware that there may be a large cavern down this way based on whatever. I don't feel like coming up with a reason right now. And that might be a better place. Or you don't even say that part. Just you say, hey, there's a large cavern over there. And if the party hears that and goes, okay, whatever, we're going to keep fighting it in the tunnel, whatever, get TPK'd. I don't care. I threw you a bone.
Pro tip, come from the ceiling, go straight down. Just as soon as you gobble one person up, just straight down.
And never come back.
It's over. It just leaves.
Yeah. Well, except for the barbarian
Teach
who
them
just
that lesson.
The barbarian who jumps down the tunnel and lands atop the worm and starts riding it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that definitely brings up another thing with the gargantuan creatures about being on top of it and how to best handle it. There are optional rules in the Dungeon Master Guide. I don't know if I'm the biggest fan of them. It's basically like you make a grapple check and then you're riding it instead of grappling it. And it gives you full advantage against it, all your attacks. And there's no negative for you of being up there other than you just move with the creature. And it takes the creature an entire action to try and knock you off, which you then get another contested check about staying on. It seems to favor the smaller creature too well, I think.
Very much so. Honestly, I feel like it should be more of that anytime you're attacked. This should be closer to a concentration check where you have to make a dexterity or strength saving throw to stay on anytime you're hit. And it could be that, again, steal the rules for concentration, half the damage or minimum of 10. Now, knocking it off, scraping it against a wall, like those types of things are mentioned as options here. Obviously, the purple worm does not have any statistics for how that works, right? It doesn't say anything, really. So either could treat it as a bite attack or make up something else. I don't really know. I'd probably want to think of that beforehand.
I think that's actually the core of this conversation. It's not necessarily what to do. This entire chapter is actually a great example of like sitting at a D&D table thinking, man, I wish there was a rule for X, Y, or Z. And then Will comes in and is like, did you read the DMG? And then you read the rule and you're like, oh, that kind of sucks.
Yeah. So just
I wish there was a rule for it. I just wish it wasn't that one.
We're on chapter 9 in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and it's like action options where it has climb onto a bigger creature, disarm, mark, overrun, like all these optional ones that nobody really uses because like 2 of them are worthwhile.
Yeah, but the core is when this happens, when you have a giant creature, a mountable creature, you have to come to the table knowing that your players are going to try and get on it. You can't never be surprised by it. This is DM 101. I try and climb onto it. It's going to happen. Just be ready.
Yeah.
And so then where it definitely gets weird about, especially like in the Purple Worm's case and just whatever the gargantuan creature is and its physical makeup and its attacks, where it can and can't attack if something's on its body. Because based on the Purple Worm art, if somebody was like right at like the base of its mouth on top of it, that should be a spot not in any danger. Like there's no way they could get up to do a bite attack and the tail wrapping all the way up the entire 80-foot length of the Purple Worm to precisely strike it at its head. It doesn't really have a head, but seems kind of weird and far-fetched, and it would need a lot of vertical space to clear that. And then based on rules as written here, that creature up there who can't be attacked has advantage on everything, and it takes an entire action to knock the creature off. And if the creature fox gets knocked off, they can just climb back on again. It doesn't even like talk about hurting them or anything.
Yeah, I guess depending on the creature, purple worm, there's probably less of a fall, but that would be something to consider. If they're atop
Sure.
the Zaratan, which is supposed to be like as tall as a building, then
Right.
yeah, you just fell 40 feet and you're taking some damage and you're prone, which probably is not a good spot to be on when you're facing a gargantuan creature. But you're
Right.
right. There's really nothing in the rules here to support this.
Not to mention, if the worm, like say you're sitting directly on the worm's head, it's like, all right, I dashed 60 feet through solid rock. Like, you were just in the equivalent of a massive industrial accident. You're done. It's over. You take 1 million damage. Not even wish can put you back together.
May the gods have mercy on your soul. No, you're right though.
Yeah, this is where I think I don't think there was any rule that could be written unless it's an individual rule for every gargantuan monster or monster that's big enough to be climbed on, because it's unique to the shape of the monster and the capability. So in the purple worm's case, if someone climbed on it, you're right. I would not be having the purple worm be able to bite them unless they're like 20 feet back and there's enough vertical space for the purple worm to lift up and like strike down at them. Again, kind of like a snake. If they position themselves well, it would be just simply the movement is really risky. It's like the purple worm just moving, it has a really high chance of knocking them off, and you just need to kind of on the spot figure out a roll that makes sense, and if they fail it, how they're going to take damage. Or maybe just some automated thing, like Will was saying, like it's solid rock, which the purple worms can burrow through, and they make a tunnel the exact diameter of the purple worm. And if they do that, you're smacking on the outside of the rock and falling off. And it's going to hurt. And you just need to figure out what damage makes sense.
No, you are pinched between the worm and the rock for 60 feet. As its spiky carapace passes over your body.
So
hundreds of spikes going, 60 feet around over your body. 1 million damage. Do not come back next week.
Or maybe a dexterity saving throw to see if you're smart enough to jump off before all of that happens. And if you fail, then it's you realizing it too late and letting go regardless and taking a bunch of damage because of it.
And that's another thing that we're just kind of eliding is the purple worms, 40,000 pounds of angry meat writhing in your created arena, however you choose to do it, it poses zero threat. Like imagine it moves its head to go bite the wizard who's at the near the tail, and like there's a bunch of people between its body and the wizard. Nothing happens. I think that's an interesting place to add a pseudo legendary action type thing. The worm attempts to crutch you with its body. Make it check.
Totally agree. I actually kind of looping back more to the using a miniature idea, something I didn't mention, but in line with that is the creature being so large that it actually provides tactical options for the player. I like the idea of, if its body is around, being able to use its body as cover from the monster itself. So I'll maybe touch on that more in a second, but to talk on what you were mentioning, Will, also have the idea of, and if you're close to it and it rolls on you, then it's going to attempt to squash you. So, creatures within 5 feet of the creature's body must make a dexterity saving throw or take a bajillion D100s in bludgeoning damage or whatever's balanced, So
I think that's it. I think you got that number.
But
I'm pulling up the table now. Yeah, it looks about right.
one bajillion, yeah. That actually comes out to an average of 55 bajillion. But yeah, I do love that idea, though, of just the creature's body needs to be a hazard in itself. But I really liked it being kind of like a double-edged sword, where maybe you could try to hide behind it. And sure, you're only getting half cover, but when it's got plus 14 to hit, any cover really can be helpful.
Yeah, definitely.
So legendary action could be good. Honestly, it could just be as part of its movement, because it almost feels weird making it a legendary action. But kind of up to you how you want to handle that.
Yeah, if the purple worm's body moves within 5 feet of a creature that is large or smaller, that blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, must make a DC blah, 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 or take bajillion D100s.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So I think we're ending this with not like a really clear structure in place. Like this is how you handle the gargantuan creatures. It's just like, but that's never the case with D&D. It's you need to think about the situation, think about the arena they're in, think about how your players are going to want to find it, what's fun for them, and
Be
you kind of
prepared.
need to make a lot of it up. Yeah.
Welcome to
Which
5th
I think
edition,
hopefully we
everyone.
gave you some ideas. Yeah. I don't know if I would want to play a rule set that has that covered. Like how many rules would you need to cover all those situations? Like how big would these stat blocks be to cover what happens if somebody's on its leg versus on its torso versus up by its
Sure.
head?
I think in a perfect world, I do not have this perfect world, but in a perfect world, you have a couple of abilities that just give those feelings and cover just about all of these scenarios. Because we just talked about the idea of being too close to the monster. What does that mean when you're too close and it's moving? Well, now we've got the same framework for what if I'm in the tunnel on top of it and it tries to shake me off? Well, it's the same thing as what happens if it tries to roll on you. You know, there's really no difference, and there's no reason to make a rule for both when one scenario kind of covers it.
Right.
You know, better rules for being atop a gargantuan creature, that just seems like a perfectly valid rule to have. I mean, that's the fact that that's an optional rule in the DMG is telling me that I don't know, maybe they just never play tested a gargantuan creature, because that, as Will said, is the first thing anyone's going to want to do. They're gonna want to ride the worm to get an advantage on it in some capacity, or just see what happens.
Right. No, but like I was saying, I think there's not going to be one general rule that covers all of them because it's just a size category. But when you have things as varied as a 80-foot meat tube that's 10-foot diameter, a giant turtle the size of a city, or a literal storm that you fight, like there's not going to be one climate on top of those thing rules that cover all of it. And that's why I think it feels like it falls really short, the one that they have, and why it was optional. And I think by not making it any sort of official rule and not saying what it is one of those cases where like the DM just needs to abdicate it, and that's okay. And we definitely disagree on that, because you're always like saying, well, no, why am I buying the book? Why aren't they designing that for me? It's like, well, it's the framework, and that's the beauty of D&D, where it's like there's the DM to make a ruling and figure out what's going to be fun and fair for the party. And then in a lot of cases, there's solid rules, and in some cases, there's not. And that's really where the DM comes in. And I think this is one of them.
We'll agree to disagree there. That's fine. But one thing that I know we always agree on.
Honestly,
Oh, no, you ruined my segue, Will.
We're not done yet. We're never gonna agree on that.
Okay.
It honestly belongs in a campaign book, which is what you write as a DM anyways. Because the situation and the monster are both important. There's no universals.
Yes. I just at the very least like when there's some precedent to work off of. But I would just argue it feels like 5th edition generally offers none. It did not hit that sweet spot of giving enough rules to facilitate these edge cases and leaving it vague enough to let you go off the rails when you need to, when things fall outside of the rules. If we look at the raw purple worm, it's way too basic to account for just about every scenario we've talked about that would come up in real play of fighting it. And that to me is a failing of the stat block. Doesn't mean that you can't think of ways around it as a DM. It's that if I just wanted a meat sack that could bite and tail sting, I didn't need a book. I could have made that. So I don't know. There's a sweet spot out there. I don't know where it's at. I don't design things. I just read stat blocks and yell about them.
Also, I think I said adjugate. It's or abjugate. It's adjudicate.
Oh.
I did that thing again where I used the wrong word.
I thought you were just talking about abjuration wizards randomly. I wasn't going to say anything.
No. Yeah.
No. Speaking of talking about things randomly, I'm going to randomly talk about our sponsor for the episode. It's not really random. That happens at the end of every episode. And that sponsor today is going to be Fanroll, which is a dice creator. Fanroll makes metallic dice. They were metallic dice games, but now they're officially Fanroll, and you can save 10% off your order there by using the code MM10 and support the show by doing so. They make fantastic dice as well as dice accessories, dice boxes to roll in, more dice arenas than boxes, but dice bags, all very cool things. Check them out. Fanroll.com, websites, everywhere that we usually put websites, descriptions, as well as monstersandmulticlass.com/support. And speaking of support, thank you to the support that our patrons have given us: Ed G, Muddawait, Brian H, Craig A, Isaac M, Luca L, Jeff W, Star Shinobi, Vincent M, Bob F, Joe P, Rick D, Sensible D20, Tyler S, Gray, Barons, Adam A, and Rob K. You all rock, and if you want to check out the Patreon, that's monstersandmulticlass.com/support. It's all in the same spot. Just go there. Just go. If you enjoyed this episode, if we gave you some inspiration of how to run gargantuan creatures, or maybe you've got questions, thoughts, whatever, feel free to leave a comment. Separately, like the video, leave a review wherever you get your podcasts, if you're listening to it via podcast, and go forth and make your own rules, because you're not getting them here. I'm not bitter.
And thanks for watching.
Yeah, that too.